Yeah.
Hi, I'm one of the techs. I'm just checking in to see if you guys are all good or if you have any questions.
Yeah, I think we're doing all right. Let's hope we have some folks joining, but I think we're doing okay. Hopefully people can figure out where to go.
Okay.
So welcome to those who are joining. We're just waiting for a few more people to come into our room. We know that having breakout rooms is a bit more complicated. So we're just going to wait a little bit before folks arrive before starting today. So hello, everyone, to those who are joining. If you've already heard this, apologies. We're just going to wait a little bit because we're doing breakout rooms, and that might be a little bit different than folks have been used to. So just bear with us as we allow people to join today. We still got a few people joining, so we'll just wait a minute. All right, well, I think we will get started. Things seem to have trickled down a little bit, but as folks join in the next little while, don't be afraid to add any information in the chat box. We have both the chat box for the main page as well as a chat box for our particular breakout room. And just wanted to really quickly thank our sponsors, the Osprey Foundation, for sponsoring this session today. This is a group of two different presentations that were put together in a great way, and we're really excited to be looking at empowerment, equality, and inclusion in the WASH sector, both within programs and then also within the workplace. If you were hoping to join the workplace group, you feel free to leave this room and go into the other room, but we are here today to talk about tools for programs specifically. So today's session is quite packed. If you have questions at all, we'll be available in the chat and for a short while after the call or through email. Feel free to reach out to any of us. For the chat, if you can just name us to make sure that the questions come to the right person, that would be helpful. Also, both rooms are going to be recorded, so if you wanted to join the other room, feel free to watch that at a later time. So recently, the WASH sector has been really exploring in lots of different ways how to foster different aspects like equality, empowerment, diversity, inclusion, and equity. And we'll be defining these terms throughout our presentations today, but we wanted to dig into how these are being measured and monitored. And these changes can happen across multiple levels. So we see changes happening, for example, for beneficiaries, for change agents within organizations, and also widely within the sector. And we want to understand what's happening at these different layers. Now, again, I discussed earlier, there's two breakout rooms today. So one is looking at that beneficiary level, it's kind of group at the bottom, and one room is looking at the workforce, which are the top two groups in this diagram as well. So if you want to go to a different room, feel free, but we'd be happy to have you here today. So joining us in leading the session, we have Emory University. Sheila, do you want to give us a little wave? There we go. And we have Sarah with the Stockholm Environment Institute. Welcome, Sarah. And myself, I'm Jess MacArthur from the Institute for Sustainable Futures, hosted at the University of Technology, Sydney. And we're going to be giving 4 presentations today. So first, we're going to start off with the framing presentation about what is the importance and why do we care about gender equality in the WASH space. Then we're going to hear a presentation from Sheila's group on the Arise. I'm going to present some work on the WASH Gem, ISF's measure. And then Sarah's going to be presenting on the Empowerment in WASH Index through SAI and Queen's University. Lastly, we're going to have a bit of a discussion around the similarities and divergences within these measures and think about how we might use them in our own work. So why do we really even need quantitative measures for programs? We think about it really basically, what's measured is what matters. And so we want to try to find different ways to answer different types of questions. Qualitative approaches might help us understand certain questions like, why is it important for WASH programs to understand empowerment? But quantitative questions, such as how much empowerment is there, had to be answered using a quantitative measure. And so we're looking at different approaches to help us answer different types of questions. The sector over the last 15 years has been growing a large body of qualitative work around the gender WASH space, and now is the time to start building these quantitative tools. We can also see, if we look at the Sustainable Development Goals 5 and 6, we see that there are targets across both the gender and WASH spaces, which require us to monitor and measure these different types of things. And especially when we think about how do we pay attention to the needs of women and girls in vulnerable situations, and how do we ensure safe water for all, safe and affordable drinking water for all. These types of targets require us to think a bit differently about how we might measure these types of elements. Embedded on all three of the measures you're going to hear about today, we have three concepts, and these are kind of nested concepts that fit together and interact with one another. The first one is gender equality, and this is probably a definition you've heard before. This comes from UN Women, but it's this concept that women and men, girls and boys have equal conditions, treatment, and opportunities to realize their potential. And then embedded under that is an aspect of empowerment. So a lot of theorists talk about empowerment as being a pathway towards gender equality. And empowerment is really about change and people's ability to make strategic life choices, possibly in an area where that was previously denied to them. So making them kind of the owners of their lives, if you will. And nested underneath that is this idea of agency. So the ability to find a goal and act upon it. It's more than observable action, and it really does look at the meaning, motivation, and purpose to why individuals do a particular type of activity. And the three measures that you're going to learn about today embed different layers and aspects of these three different concepts. Now, there are a lot of existing empowerment and equality measures throughout the development world. There are some non-sectoral and national level measures, such as what we see in the DHS or the Demographic and Health Survey modules on empowerment. So there's a lot of work that's been going into how do these particular modules work and how do they help us to understand empowerment. There's also a variety of human development indices like the UNDP indices and the OEDC indices that look at gender equality at a national level or at more of a macro level. Then there's a series of programmatic measures. These look at things like power and autonomy, it's like gender-based violence and microfinance, as well as agency in aspects like agriculture and livelihoods. Now, interestingly enough, there's a fairly wide range. Don't be scared by the slide, but there's a really wide range of measures that exist within the development sector. And you can kind of see here, all the different boxes relate to a different type of measure, and we've got lots of them to build on. And this is a wide sector that we're stepping into. There are measures of agency, there are measures of power and autonomy, human development, and also these DHS modules, as I spoke about earlier. One of the most interesting measures that we all have kind of pulled from and thought about is the Women's Empowerment in Agricultural Index that came out in 2013. And that's been really influential in the sector as we think about measuring empowerment. And we've seen versions of that come up in everything from solar electrification to livestock. And each one of those helps us to think about how we might bring that into the WASH sector. Now, each of the three measures you're going to be hearing about in the rest of today's presentation have slightly unique framing. So the ARISE measure has three different domains: resources, agency, and institutional structures. The IWI, am I saying that right, Sarah? Has three layers: individual, household, and societal. And the WASH GEM has five, ranging from resources through well-being. And so you're going to hear how a lot of the concepts that may be the same types of questions, the same types of indicators might appear in slightly different places and in slightly different orders, but a lot of the foundation that's gone into these measures is very similar. All right, so I'm going to hand over my screen to Sheila from Emory to present a little bit about the RISE.
You're muted.
Thanks, Jess. Sorry about that. Okay, is this the correct view for the presentation?
If you can, yeah, there it is.
Okay, great. Thanks, Jess. And hi, everyone. I am presenting on the validation of the agency, resources, and institutional structures for sanitation-related empowerment, or ARISE scales. And this has been a true collaborative effort. You can see our Emory team members listed here, as well as the logos of many of our partners who have contributed to this work. So the goal of this work has been to create and validate survey tools to measure women's sanitation-related empowerment in urban areas. And the approach that we've used, we started with this definition that you see here of empowerment, the expansion of choice and the strengthening of voice through the transformation of power relations, so women and girls have more control over their lives. And the image that you're seeing on the right is the conceptual framework that we've used of empowerment, which has 3 domains, as just mentioned, from left to right: resources, agency, and institutional structures. And this is the conceptual framework and definition of empowerment that is used by our funder, the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, in all of their work across sectors, not only in WASH, but for all of their gender and empowerment work. And so this was our guiding framework for our tool development. And so just to go through the process, I'm not going to go into any detail at all here due to time constraints, but just want to really emphasize that this has been a long and rigorous process. We've really tried to follow a gold standard process of scale development. So this has been ongoing for 3 years already. We started in 2018. We spent about a year just developing the survey instruments and doing all of the sort of background work for that, and then started collecting data in 2019. And we're luckily able to collect data in person from about 2,000 women in 2 cities, Tiruchirappalli or Trichy, India, and Kampala, Uganda, by the end of 2019, beginning of 2020. We finished our data collection in January of 2020. And so then we were able to spend all the rest of 2020 and much of 2021 doing the statistical analysis for the scale validation. And I'll go into that in a bit more detail in a moment. But so now we're in phase 3 of the work where we are doing further validation in more cities. And so we're collecting data across 8 cities in the 5 countries that you see listed here. And so in terms of data analysis, we started by randomly splitting our data into two halves, random split half samples. And with the first half, we do exploratory factor analysis to identify the larger underlying concepts, the subconstructs, factors within each scale, and to identify which survey questions or items in the survey, in the scale development lingo, map onto those constructs or factors. And then with the other half of the data, we do a confirmatory factor analysis to test the factor structure that was identified in the EFA. And then we do a multiple group CFA, which is really important because this allows us to assess the measurement invariance of our factor structure, which just means that we are testing whether we are measuring the same constructs in different populations. So as I said, we had data from India and Uganda, and we want to know, does this instrument measure the same constructs in the same way in each population? If so, then our results can be compared. If we can't show measurement invariance, then the scores in each country are not comparable and we can't compare our data. So that's a really important step. Then going on to item response theory approaches to assess the psychometric properties of each individual question or item in the scale. And then the sort of more traditional validity and reliability testing, assessing various forms of validity and different forms of reliability, including internal consistency and test-retest reliability. So going into our results, a key result is that multiple items were dropped through the validation process, which is a good and expected thing. In scale development processes, you can start with more questions or items than you would ideally like to have because you're testing how each one performs. And so then you can keep the ones that perform the best and drop the ones that don't perform as well. So we started with 15 scales for the subdomains, the 15 subdomains of empowerment that we were trying to measure. They had 9 to 53 items each. And through the analysis, we were able to shorten the scales to between 5 and 19 items each. And we split the critical consciousness scale into 2 subscales. So we started with 15, ended with 16 shorter scales. And obviously these shorter scales are much more practical for use in research, monitoring, and evaluation. So we ended up with 16 validated scales that can be used independently of each other. Each one is independently validated. And so they're measuring the subconstructs, the subdomains of empowerment that you see listed here. And so we have the 16 scales and also 6 indices. And again, this is just more scale development jargon that where a scale measures a latent construct, an intangible concept, and an index does not. And the indices, our indices measure women's actual experiences related to the 4 subdomains of agency that you're seeing here in red. And then our 1 index for safety and security under resources measures women's awareness of other women's experiences related to violence, sanitation related violence. So we have those 6 indices. And we also have menstruation specific items that are not included in the scales because we want the scales to be applicable to all women. And of course, all women are not menstruators. But we have the menstruation specific items as optional add-ons to the scales. So just as a quick example, I'll go through the bodily integrity scale, and our definition of bodily integrity is women's perception of dignity and satisfaction around their own body and sanitation activities. And so there are 2 factors within the bodily integrity scale, 2 subconstructs. One represents satisfaction with the sanitation location. And there were 4 items that loaded onto that factor. An example of one of them is the sanitation location I used most often was clean enough. The other factor in the scale represents withholding and suppression behaviors, had 5 items that loaded onto it. And an example of one of those is I had to suppress the urge to urinate or defecate when away from home. All 9 items in the scale have the same response options. And then you can see the mean scale scores calculated from those 9 items on the right-hand side for Trichy in blue and Kampala in red. And you can see they are quite, fairly high in both cities, but slightly higher in Trichy than in Kampala. In contrast to the scale, again, we have the indices. And so this slide is showing the indices for household level on the left and community level on the right, decision-making. And so you can see the level of household level participation in decision-making is much higher than in community level decision-making. And so just as a very quick example of how this data can be immediately useful, one of our partners, the Kampala Capital City Authority, you saw those lower levels of community level decision-making and immediately started making plans around programming that they could do, such as establishing women's forums where women's participation in sanitation-related discussions and decision-making would be encouraged, and carrying out trainings on why women should be part of decision-making, including in the private sector. So as I said, just to quickly wrap up, we are now in phase 3. We're collecting data in these 8 cities across 5 countries. We've added items to assess COVID's impact on WASH experiences. We've added items to identify women's priority concerns, and we are including men now in 2 of these cities. So I'd like to acknowledge our funder, the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, and all of our partner organizations, and of course the study participants who gave their time. And to again thank our Emory team, and especially my co-PI, Bethany Caruso, who co-leads this project with me. And we welcome you to put your questions in the chat in Pathable and to contact us after the presentation. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you so much, Sheila. It's so wonderful to hear, and every time I hear about it, I'm just excited because it's so much rigor that's gone into the measure. I'm a bit nervous to present mine now, no, but it's good. So I'm going to share my screen here as well, and we'll get started with the wash gem, if I am able to. Perhaps. There we go. All right, wonderful. So thank you so much for continuing to listen. We have one more participant, so welcome to those who are just joined. I'm going to be presenting a little bit about the wash gem, some of the measure design and validation study results. We're kind of at a very similar phase to ARISE, and it's going to be interesting to kind of compare and contrast where the different aspects are. So once again, this work is being led by the Institute for Sustainable Futures, and it's funded by the Water for Women program by AusAid, Australian Aid. So the wash gem, what is the wash gem? So over the last 10 years, ISF's been conducting qualitative explorations of how wash interventions are really impacting gender equality. And this qualitative work has helped us to design a measure with ongoing water and sanitation programming with IDE in Cambodia and SNV in Nepal. This has been happening through a staged approach. We also did a lit review and a rapid pilot in both countries, exploratory pilot in both countries, and finally a validation pilot that wrapped up earlier this year. We've also been engaging with practitioners and specialists from a wide range of individuals. So we have CBM, who works with disability, EduFect with sexual and gender minorities, as well as IWDA, which is Australia's leading gender equality research organization for the development sector. And obviously working with IDE in Cambodia and SNV in Nepal. The measure is called the WASH GEM, which is the Water, Sanitation, and Hygiene Gender Equality Measure. The GEM measures aspects of gender equality, both related to WASH and beyond. We think about these as ripple effects, so moving from one area of life into another area of life. And the GEM has 5 domains. So we don't add these up, similar to what ARISE is doing. We don't add these into a single index or scale, but we look at each domain separately. The 5 domains are resources, agency, critical consciousness, structures, and well-being. You might see some similar wording with ARISE and this as well. Now, across the 5 domains, there are 17 themes. These would operate similarly to ARISE's scales, and some of them are scales and some of them are indices. They fall into the 2 different areas of WASH and beyond WASH. So beyond WASH are areas which do not have WASH-related aspects, and the WASH areas are purely about WASH. We've also explored these by a variety of other factors, including gender, country, region, etc. Now, the WASH GEM domains are not to be compared, but they really do help us to see 5 overlapping and kind of interconnected aspects of gender equality. So they connect and they overlap and they intersect in unique ways and help us to understand different pictures of something that's happening in the world. So I'd like to explore a few thematic findings from our validation results. And you'll see these ones as the bolder colors on the screen. So we'll just look at kind of 1 to 2 in each of the domains. So lots of text on this slide, don't get scared. In the resources domain, which is highlighted in blue across all of our work, I'm going to highlight 2 aspects, so access to WASH and then also social capital. So access to WASH is an index. You heard Sheila give a really good explanation of what that means, and this is looking at access to water, sanitation, soap, and menstrual hygiene management. And we see kind of similar levels of WASH access between men and women in both countries. But when we dig into individual items, we see really strong country-wise variation in things like water collection times, as well as gender-wise variation in access to soap. So men reported really low levels of soap access because when they go to work, there's often not soap at work where it might be at home. Moving to social capital, which is actually only 1 item, Sheila talked about this idea of trying to bring the scales down to as short as possible. And we had a lot of feedback from the partners that the survey was too long. And so the idea is trying to get things down to as short as possible. And we had multiple items originally in our social capital section, but they all performed very similarly. Very, very similarly. So we ended up reducing it down to a single item. And what we see here is that there's quite similar in Cambodia, we see that men's social capital is higher than women's in certain regions. So Kampong Thom and Prey Veng, which are both rural provinces, performed quite differently to Kandal, which is a peri-urban. And then in Nepal, we see that in Dailakh and Salahi, you have quite similar levels, but really when you dig into that a bit more deeply, you understand that there's significant variation in religious groups, even more than in ethnicity, which I would think is more common when we think about Dalits and other minorities within Nepal, but religion seems to have a stronger impact. All right, moving to agency, which is the orange domain, if you will. I'll just share some really quick highlights of two of those themes, collective agency, which is a 5-item scale, and self-efficacy, which is also a 5-item scale. We see across the board that collective agency and self-efficacy were higher in Nepal than Cambodia and showed significant regional variation. But one of the most interesting findings and thing to keep in your mind is that we did see lower levels of agency in men in 3 of the 5 regions. So this helps us to understand that, especially in areas where you might have social minorities or individuals with disability, which were part of this survey, that you may have men who have reduced agency as well. This can be, for example, in Nepal based on caste, and in Cambodia based on wealth. Moving to our critical consciousness subscale, so we can think about this as a gender equality awareness score or scale. This is slightly different than how the ARISE defines this. And again, it's just different terminology or same terminology looking at slightly different things. But this scale includes 12 items. These are related to education, gender roles, rights, and opportunities. And we see with education increasing, unsurprisingly, gender awareness scores go up in both Cambodia and Nepal. However, when we looked at the linear correlations with other domains, we wanted to see, does critical consciousness impact structures? We actually, or impact agency, pardon me. We saw that there wasn't a correlation between increased critical consciousness and increased agency. We did see correlations with structures. And this helps us to think about how the concept that awareness really isn't enough. So if we're thinking about raising gender equality awareness within communities, that doesn't necessarily translate to increased agency. Our 4th domain is the structures domain, always in pink. And I'm going to present just 2 really quickly. So the first one is WASH norms, broken this down by marriage, tried to give you a variety of different factors here or aspects to look at, pardon me. And in Cambodia and Nepal, we see that, in Cambodia, we see that marriage doesn't have a significant impact on how people believe their beliefs about who does what in WASH. So this would be thinking about who collects water. In my community, it's the norm that women collect water, or in my community, it's the norm that men manufacture toilets, for example. And so we're looking at those types of beliefs. And we see that in Nepal, married women and non-married women have significantly less equal perspectives of gender roles. Moving on to mobility, though, we see reverse trends. So married women are showing lower mobility in Cambodia, but Nepali men show higher levels of mobility. So it's an opposite movement here. And this is something we want to explore in more detail. So one of the aspects, for example, is the idea of invariance between countries, and that's something we want to understand if that's happening in this data. At the moment, we haven't been able to do that, but that's part of the next phase. Lastly, the domain of well-being. I'm going to talk about 2 aspects of well-being, WASH well-being and physical health. We see that well-being is increasing with age for women in Cambodia, but it's remaining relatively stable in Nepal. And this is related to safety, stress, and privacy, and it's an 8-item index. On the physical health side, we see again these reverse trends, which is what we want to continue to explore in more detail, and that physical health is increasing with age in Nepal. So well-being was relatively high in both countries, so slightly lower in Nepal compared to Cambodia, but it is showing significant gender and age variations. Now, going back to that ripple effect, that was, I remember I posed to you that was the main kind of goal of the WASH gem. So let's look at those ripple effects from the WASH to beyond WASH. Scary slide, don't get scared. Let me draw your attention to the top a bit. So WASH programs tend to really address gender equality concerns related to resources and well-being. So the blue and the purple. But what we can see by the slope of the lines, which helps us to understand the impact of WASH, which is on the bottom, and beyond WASH, which is on up and down, so cross versus up and down. The well-being and resources have fairly low impacts from WASH to beyond WASH. But we can see with structures and agency, it's still relatively low, but we see, especially for agency, it's getting into the medium level. And so the idea is that addressing issues of agency within WASH might be associated with gains in agency in other realms of life, and maybe helps us to think about as a WASH sector that we may want to expand beyond just thinking about resources and well-being, and think about how do we increase agency and more equal structures. So the next steps were, again, also similar to Arise, doing a multi-country scale-up with the WASH Gym underway in 6 countries. And we'll also be launching a gender equality and WASH management training and development alongside several other partners within the Water for Women Fund. So watch this space. You want to learn more? waterforwomen.uts.edu.au. And thank you so much to all who participated, specifically our colleagues at ID Cambodia and SNV Nepal. If you want to download the slides, they're available, and all the visuals here are clickable, as well as the blue text. Feel free to reach out to me, my colleagues, if you have any questions. Thank you so much. That was a whirlwind, but I'm going to pass it over to Sarah now to present the EV. Sarah, do you want to unmute yourself when you get a chance? Yeah, perfect, super.
Yeah, it asked me that actually. Great. Thanks, Jess and Sheila. Those were really interesting presentations. Is this showing the right thing? Okay. Just gonna start my timer so I don't go over time. So hi everyone, my name is Sarah Dicken. I'm a research fellow at the Stockholm Environment Institute. Today I'm going to be talking about the Empowerment in WASH Index, and this was developed together with Elijah Bissung of Queen's University, as well as a number of partners I'll mention at the end of the presentation. So I'm going to talk quickly about why we're doing this, gaps in measuring women's empowerment in a WASH context. Then I'll talk about how the Empowerment in WASH Index tool was developed, or the EWI, and its applications. And then I will talk a bit about our pilot studies that we did in Ghana and Burkina Faso and some next steps. So first of all, why is this important? Many of you know the really strong links between SDG 6 and achieving SDG 5 on gender equality. And WASH interventions are believed to be critically important for gender equality. But one challenge has been that technical solutions alone are not enough. And I liked this quote that says that taps and toilets are not enough. You also need women's voice, choice, and agency. If you don't have decision-making power, or you don't have control over resources, women may not actually have control over what kind of services they have access to. So those services may not actually meet their needs. So there's growing interest in empowerment as well as transformative approaches, and these go beyond just the infrastructure needs, which of course are important, but they also address power relations, particularly between men and women, which are drivers of inequalities. And the second challenge is that we haven't really had good data on this. And linked to that, we haven't had tools to provide data on what's working and what isn't working when it comes to evaluating gender outcomes. So that's one challenge that we hope to address with the Empowerment in WASH Index, as well as the other tools you've heard about today. So now I'm going to give you a bit of an overview of the tool. There are more details that were published in the paper here in World Development that provides a lot of information on the methodology. But overall, it's a survey-based tool. So data is collected from men and women decision makers in a household. It focuses on empowerment, particularly agency. And it's an index, so it's comprised of a number of indicators to assess empowerment. And these address things which are WASH related, as well as broader indicators of empowerment in society. And the tool is based on the Women's Empowerment in Agriculture Index, which Jess mentioned earlier. This is a tool that's been used in a large number of countries to assess women's empowerment in agriculture. And it provides a really good base for how we can also extend that to the WASH sector. And the WEA tool has also influenced policy in a number of different cases. So I think it's a really good example of how we can also do this in a WASH context. So because it's an index, there's a threshold of 75% where a respondent has to achieve 75% of the indicators to be considered empowered. So you may achieve one indicator in a particular area, but you have to actually achieve past the threshold to be considered empowered overall. And this is because we view empowerment as a multidimensional concept. So you need to be empowered in multiple areas of life. So we believe that this tool can help fill some of the gender data gaps that exist at the moment. And it can do this through a number of different applications. So the first would be to apply the tool as a diagnostic. So if you are designing an intervention and you want to understand what to focus on most in a particular context, you can collect data on both what's driving empowerment or disempowerment and use this to inform your work. You can also use it to monitor change over time and to evaluate different programs. So if you were expecting to have an impact on gender, you can evaluate whether this is actually a positive, negative, or neutral effect. So the development of the tool has been done in a couple different stages. I'm going to be talking about some of the results from the pilot stage today. So the developments, so the pilot stage involved a couple of cases in West Africa, in Ghana and Burkina Faso. So we drew on existing literature and tools for measuring empowerment. And as just mentioned, there is a really good base to start from outside the WASH sector of how to measure empowerment. But we also wanted to draw on stakeholder understandings of this term because it does differ greatly between cultures. So we conducted a consultation to understand what was important when it came to empowerment in both Burkina Faso and Ghana. More recently, we have done an online consultation with a number of global WASH actors to further refine our tool and work on the indicators. So just to give you some, this is pre-COVID workshops in Ghana. So we used a concept mapping approach, which takes where people generate a wide number of concepts and then they're narrowed down into particular themes. So we got themes like traditions, cultural norms, leadership and participation, knowledge sharing, accessibility, participation, and household roles. This was really helpful to help us develop the tool, and in particular, knowledge sharing is not something that's in that many tools directly measuring empowerment, but it was seen as something critically important for the WASH sector. So then it made it in as an indicator in the tool. So now you can see here, I'm just gonna show it all at once. So yeah, like knowledge sharing was added in as an indicator. You can see here the different indicators, and this is going to change a little bit with the recent consultation I mentioned to refine these indicators. But you can see that they're at 3 different levels: individual, household, and community. This is in addition to the WASH specific and the broader societal indicators that I mentioned. So at an individual level, we're looking at things like perceptions and attitudes. At the household level, we're looking at things like decision-making related to, for example, who's collecting water or spending decisions on water or sanitation. We're also looking at things like work balance, which is one of those more general indicators, looking at the difference between work time and time for leisure or rest. We were also looking at sharing of knowledge, like I said. And then at the community level, we were looking at group membership, which is indicator of social capital, so another broader indicator, as well as comfort in participating in activities like community meetings related to WASH activities, like planning a new project, as well as comfort in complaining to local authorities or leaders when there's some kind of service problem. So now I'm going to briefly talk about some of our results from Burkina Faso. This is from Benfora. And so what you can see overall here, this is actually showing disempowerment. And you can see for men on the left and for women that women are more disempowered in the 3 different levels. So both individual, household, and community level. For the household level in particular, it's more than double the level of disempowerment. What we can also see here actually is that, so for these disempowered individuals, for women, they had achieved around 48% of the indicators, and for men, they had achieved around 57%. So as the threshold was 75%, you can also see that women also have much further to go to reach that empowerment threshold. And we can zoom in on these indicators a little bit more. So we can see here that men, for example, who were disempowered, the most important indicator was the one on input into decisions in the household about wash roles and responsibilities. So this might be expected in that some men feel left out of household decisions on issues around water collection or management. For women, we can see a number of indicators that are important. So for example, women were not comfortable interacting with local authorities to make complaints about services or participating in community meetings or activities. So speaking up in public about decisions at that community level. And this could be related to dynamics at the household level. So we see work balance was also an important one. Women were not satisfied with their level of work and they were doing more work. They passed the sort of threshold for that indicator in terms of work versus leisure or rest time. We can also see that input into decisions about wash expenditures is a really important one. I think this is actually the one contributing most to disempowerment for women. And this is really important because women may be most impacted by poor water quality, by lots of time spent collecting water. But in Benfora, they did not have much control over the decisions to actually invest in water sanitation, which is actually something that the local municipality was trying to do. They were trying to increase household connections. So making that large investment to connect to the water supply. So this is something that you can see how the tool can really highlight the areas that are most important in a particular context. So I'm just going to finish now by talking about the next steps. So we're hoping to develop some guides to support the use of this tool. We have had some requests for how to use the tool. So this is something that we're hoping to develop. We're also hoping to conduct a few other case studies in order to do some cross-cultural validation and further adjusting the thresholds in the tool. And then from the research side, we're also hoping to look more at the links between the empowerment scores and other types of WASH outcomes to look at those different causal pathways. I just also put a review that we're undertaking on the right. This is looking at empowerment as well as a number of other gender outcomes. So this is just something to keep an eye out for. And I just want to finish by thanking our funder, which was the REACH water security program that's funded by FCDO. And we also worked with IRC in both of our Ghana and Burkina cases. So I wanted to thank them for their involvement and support. So thank you. I'll pass it back over to you, Jess.
Yeah, wonderful. Thanks so much. It's really interesting to see the kind of similarities and differences of how we're all thinking about this. And it's been great to see because all of these measures have been designed kind of simultaneously or around similar timeframes. So I'm just going to share really quickly. We've got 2 more slides for you and 2 minutes, which I think we can do it. So this is back to you, Sarah. We put together this diagram. You want to talk a little bit about it? Is it, oh.
We have 15 minutes, right?
Oh, we have 15 minutes. Oh, you're right. Oh, that's right. Absolutely.
Yes, so we can, yep, I will. Can you put it onto the sort of larger mode? Or
is it not? Nah. Is it not in a larger mode now? Working, not working?
Not on my screen.
Stop share. I will start sharing again. Sorry about that. Better?
Yeah, that's great. So that was a lot of information. So now we just wanted to quickly summarize some of the different overlapping and the divergences between the tools. So I'll just give a brief overview, but Jess and Sheila, feel free to jump in as well. So you can see, first of all, that these tools have been conducted in both urban and rural areas in quite a range of different areas. In the case of the Muse tool, this has been focused on urban settings, whereas the GEM tool and the EWI have been conducted in mostly rural settings. Is that right, Jess?
Yeah, that's correct. I'll.
Okay. And the Muse tool is focusing on sanitation, whereas the GEM tool and the EWI are focusing on WASH more broadly. You can also see a bit of a different focus, for example, on empowerment in urban sanitation compared to looking at WASH more generally, or looking at gender equality more broadly in the case of the GEM tool, and for the EWI focusing much more directly on empowerment. There were also different respondents for these tools. So in some of the tools, you have pairs of men and women in a household. In some cases, the tools focus on women. And as you heard, there was a bit of a combination as well. And then overall, all of the three tools can be used as both diagnostic tools as well as for monitoring and evaluation of programs to monitor and evaluate whether gender outcomes that are hopefully planned as part of the program are actually being achieved. So I think that summarizes things overall, and maybe Jess or Sheila would like to add something.
No, that's great. Yeah. And I'm sorry there, Sheila. I realize I have the old name of the Muse versus Arise. I apologize for that. Didn't catch that there.
No problem. No problem at all.
Wonderful. So since we do have actually quite a bit of time and we managed to make things move, would it be possible to open up the floor for some questions? We've got a little bit of time, and then maybe Sheila, you want to come back and do the action planning at the end. Does that sound okay? Okay, super. I don't know if anyone can unmute themselves. If you would like to raise your hand, I think we can do that. Can folks raise their hands?
I've just enabled unmute yourself. So
okay. Yeah, so does anyone have any questions? We have time and we're a small group, so we'd love to hear from you. If we don't have any questions, we could also finish early and folks can get their lunch, which is another option. No problem. Oh, we've got a question from Darcy. Darcy, you want to speak? I'm going to ask you to unmute. Go for it.
Okay, I think I'm unmuted now.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, great. It's good to see all these measurement tools. I'm curious who you see as kind of the target population for these. So looking at, community empowerment, but I'm wondering if you've thought about applying these to implementers and looking at gender roles and empowerment among implementers and how those might affect program outcomes.
I can answer that, or I'm sure we can all answer that, but I can start by saying we use the empowerment tool as part of an evaluation. I'm not going to say which organization actually, because the information is not published yet, but it was included in an evaluation of a WASH program. The program itself actually didn't include any kind of gender mainstreaming, so it was actually kind of a very traditional WASH intervention focusing mostly on technology. So we did use the EWI, and actually there was no difference between the treatment and the control groups in terms of empowerment, which is quite interesting and reinforces the idea that you may need to really think about your gender mainstreaming approach if you want to see a positive change in your intervention. And it shouldn't just be an assumption that providing those services is going to positively improve gender equality.
Yeah, likewise. Sorry, I'm just trying to unmute myself. Where's the?
We can hear you.
You're
okay.
unmuted.
I'm unmuted. All right. So I'm talking to myself here. Yeah, I'll answer that as well, Darcy. Such a good question. So we did in Cambodia, we applied this measure for latrine business owners who are change agents within the system. So they don't work directly for IDE, but they are part of the WASH system, and they're considered kind of pseudo employees, and we compared their scores as a separate region when we were doing the analysis. So we have done it that way. But for the WASH gem, there's a lot of aspects that look at household level WASH and household level access that would need to be tailored if it's just looking at individuals who work for an organization. But I will put in a little plug for a couple of other things that might be helpful for you. So there's ISF recently launched a toolkit called the Qual Kit, which is a qualitative kind of partnership to this work. And it does have a lot of resources for looking at gender and WASH. And my PhD is on that, so watch this space because there's a lot more coming out in the next couple of months. Yeah, Sheila, do you have anything else you want to add to that?
Sure, I'll just answer quickly because I see we have two more hands raised. So for the Arise tool, our funder, the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, funded us to create this tool specifically so that their grantees can use it across the WASH sector. We've started working within their CWIS, citywide inclusive sanitation programming. So the partner organizations are the ones who are implementing the CWIS programming, and it ranges from city water authorities, like I mentioned, the Kampala Capital City Authority, water and sanitation, utility providers, and to universities, NGOs, et cetera. So those are the users of our tool so far, and that's how we're able to collect data across these 5 countries by partnering with the CWIS grantees. Thanks for that question. I think Laura, you had your hand up next.
Yeah, thank you so much. This was super interesting. Really enjoyed your presentations on the tools. This was a lot of information, so I apologize if I missed this, but what's coming out so far is that this has been very research focused and then also implemented in collaboration with local NGOs to kind of test and pilot these different tools. But I'm curious if if you have done some work with either national ministries or local government entities, or if there's a plan for how some of these tools might get built into local or national monitoring metrics over time.
I can start again with
Thanks,
that
Laura.
one.
Oh, okay, Sarah, go ahead.
So I didn't really have time to go into that part of it in my presentation, but we worked with IRC, who was developing WASH master plans in 2 municipalities in Burkina Faso and Ghana. And so after we got the results in our pilot studies, we conducted some workshops with municipal as well as regional government to look at how the results could be used to inform the annual action plans that they were creating for those 2 cases. So I think it was actually quite powerful in the sense that there's not usually quantitative data on some of these things, which are, the findings were probably not like a surprise, but to have the actual data and to compare between the men and women respondents in a household was quite powerful. So I think there's potential for more of that, but yeah, I'll stop there.
Sheila, do you want to maybe share a little bit about the JMP stuff that's connected?
Oh, sure. And I would invite Bethany to do that. Also, I would just to answer the question specifically about working with city or national authorities. As I mentioned, we worked with a number of utility providers, the Kampala Capital City Authority. In Zambia, it's LWSC, the Lusaka Water Sanitation Company. In Senegal, it's the national level water and sanitation institute. So there are a number of government partners that we are working with. Apologies, I don't remember I know the French acronym for Senegal, and I'm not able to translate on the spot. So it is the national ministry. But yeah, so thank you, Laura, for that question. We are working and have been able to really benefit and learn from them, from their experience working in these cities, and are now in the process of collaborating with them to talk about how this can be an ongoing part of their monitoring, especially in Kampala, as we're going back now the 2nd time to continue collecting data there. Bethany, did you want to quickly talk about the JMP?
Thanks so much, and I won't take up a lot of time to sidetrack this, but yeah, as a separate project, we've been working with the Joint Monitoring Program to do a a rigorous review of existing measures related to assessing gender related to WASH. So looking at across a number of different tools and across a number of different domains. We have shared in a webinar with some stakeholders the sort of final assessment of that It was a multi-stage process. We have a final report, so stay tuned for that. I would just say that one of the take-home messages that I would have related to monitoring is it really requires people to be on the same page as to what are the priorities for monitoring gender related to WASH. And so it's not up to just one of us or one of these teams to make that decision as to what are the key priorities for assessing gender in WASH. So there's a lot of work that needs to be done to sort of get on the same page that involves governments, involves existing data, and fills gaps where data doesn't exist or where measurement tools don't exist. So stay tuned and hopefully continue involvement. Thanks.
Thanks so much, Bethany. I'm going to go to Colleen. I'll ask you to unmute. We've just got a couple more minutes. We've got Colleen and Jordan. So Colleen first.
Oh, hi, thanks. Yeah, thanks for those great presentations and tools. Sorry if I missed it. Is this gender focused on like sex assigned at birth? I was wondering how we may best serve some of our like transgender populations.
That is such a great question. I will answer quickly from the GEM side, and then maybe others want to. So we worked really closely with an organization that focuses on sexual and gender minorities, which are working more broadly within the Water for Men Fund, and had them review our tool, as well as allowing people to self-identify based on gender. We didn't show the data for those who had self-identified as another gender because there was such a small number that they would be really easily identifiable within the data, but we do have that. And it's something that we're going to be considering as we go to the next phase. So that's, yeah, thank you for such a great question. Sarah, do you have I saw you unmute.
Yeah, well, we didn't address that specifically. The tool asks for a principal woman and man decision maker from the household. So that can be identified however the household wants to be, but we haven't gone beyond that. But if you have ideas, I'm open to them.
And I'll just quickly chime in and say, yes, that is a limitation of our tool at the moment. Our funder asked us to focus on women as a starting point. We're now adding men and recognize that that there is a whole spectrum of people that we would like to be including in addition to as we continue developing and further validating the tool. Thank you, Colleen, for that question.
Thank you.
Wonderful. So yeah, Jordan, you want to share your question? We've got just a couple minutes.
Yeah, sure. I'll try to be quick here asking it, but yeah, appreciated all the information. It was, I was trying to follow along with everything here. So forgive me if I'm asking a question that repeats anything, but I'm curious about these tools in relation to any type of efficacy studies, or like earlier in the conference, we had some sessions, related to implementation science. From World Vision standpoint, like right now, we're taking a pretty deep look at our programming and trying to figure out, I think there was a quote someone put up, taps and toilets aren't enough type of thing. And there's other types of ways to implement and implementation types of activities that need to be associated in order to fully, realize women empowerment. So I'm curious, these tools seem like great opportunities in being able to, assess and evaluate a situation, but I'm curious how you see them being used in implementation science or efficacy studies. Thanks.
Yeah, such a good question. Maybe I'll start and we can go through. So we are in the process of part of the scale up is looking at exactly that. We don't have answers for you now, but hopefully in the next year, we will have some better answers around that topic. But we're really trying to clarify, because there's such a diversity of what we can call as interventions within the WASH sector, it starts by really trying to identify exactly what those are and what we want to measure. So we're in the process of that with IDE and SNB at the moment, but we'll watch this space. Does someone else want to?
I could add that, I think these tools help to contribute to the evidence base, which has been missing. We're currently conducting it separate from this tool. We're conducting a systematic review right now of all WASH interventions and how they have been evaluated in terms of contributing to gender outcomes. And there are a lot of gaps here in terms of, how interventions have actually been evaluated for those kinds of outcomes. So I think this is a critical area that can be addressed from a number of different angles, but I think these tools will help to fill that gap in terms of there's been a real focus on measuring public health outcomes, in particular technical outcomes, service standard outcomes, And because gender is such a critical part of WASH, we also need those robust indicators in order to measure it if we're hoping to achieve that in our program.
Yeah, super. Great questions, everyone. Yeah, so I think we're at time now. I'm just looking at my thing. Sheila wants to apologize. Her internet just dropped out. So perfect timing on that dropout. So wanted to thank everyone for joining on her behalf, but then also on behalf of Sarah and myself, thank you so much for joining. We're really excited to be sharing this work with you. And again, these are early days for all of these tools. There's lots more to come. So continue to explore this. And if you have any other questions, we're always available by email. Thanks so much, everyone.
Thanks, Jess, for organizing the session.
Thank you.